All right, we're gonna go ahead and go through unboxing the supplies and tools included in your system. The first thing we see here is a roll of some 3/4 inch masking tape. Also be included would be a couple rolls of 1.5 inch masking tape. We have a roll of wire tape, which is used to cut that clean edge after you're finished with the project. This is not as applicable as the fiber tape is here. This is used more universally for truck beds and things like that. The fiber tape is more so used in more heavy duty, thicker coating jobs that you're doing. Also, we have the masking dispenser. We'll attach a roll of paper, as you see here, to it. This is the finished project after it's assembled. And this next box is that paper that is included to complete this assembly. And also we have the clean sheeting. It's like a roll of plastic. It clings pretty well to cars or anything like that. You want to keep overspray off when you're spraying your project. All right, over here we have our fresh air pump, and I want to go ahead and note the intake and the outtake filters. These need to be replaced regularly. Also with this air pump, we have your full face mask. This is going to be used to supply that fresh air for you to breathe instead of breathing in that bad air into your spray area. It also has a peel off in case this gets overspray or your visibility gets kind of limited because of the overspray. You also can just peel this off, and you have a package of replacements to reapply a new one at that point. Also, you want to make sure this is tightly secured to your face so you have a nice seal. OSHA does recommend not having any facial hair so it doesn't disrupt that seal at all. And also you have these air lines that come with that fresh air pump. It's designed for one man at 100 feet or two men at 50 feet each. And you want to make sure you store this away from your spray area where you have good fresh air. And with that full face mask also, it's a good idea to go ahead and wear your head sock. That keeps overspray from getting in your hair, on your ears, or anything like that that's not covered by this full face lens. Also, I want to go ahead and go over what's in here. We have boot covers. Those are used so you keep your shoes from getting any kind of overspray or anything like that on it. We have a regular carbon fiber respirator. This isn't intended for your actual application, more so for working with solvents or grinding and things like that, other tools. And with that, you'll have to wear the safety glasses is also recommended to be using when you're working with solvents or using any of the other tools. We have coveralls that are designed for us to use during application to keep you from staying clean. And also, finally, we have the latex gloves. You want to don these when working with solvents or you're actually spraying to keep those hands from getting overspray and anything like that on them. All right, for this, we're going to talk about the tools included in your package. To start, we have the acetone plunge can. This is used to fill with acetone. You can get a rag, plunge it down, and get that rag nice and wet before you wipe down a surface before you spray. It also is a vapor locked as well. When not in use, all that remaining acetone will funnel back down into this airtight canister. Next, we have our air angle sander. This is used for prepping surfaces. Primarily for truck beds, but it could be used in other places as well. Along with that, we have our scuffing cut brush. This is also used with a truck bed primarily, but again, it can be used for other applications as well. Next, we have our scratch pad, which is used to prep edges that scuffing cut brush can't quite reach. This is a good way to reach those areas to give it a good profile. Next, we have a drum wrench. Used to open up drum bungs to install your hardware. Very handy to have for that. Caulking gun. We pair this with a urethane-based caulking to fill in seams and cracks. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. We have a cleaning pick used to clean small areas like in guns or pump rebuilds. It's very handy to have. We have an infrared thermometer to get temperature of a substrate or your drum temperature. It's pretty accurate and very useful to have. We also have a pocket blowgun to blow off a substrate before application, like truck beds after you're done scuffing to get that dust and debris off. This is very useful to use in that application. And finally, we have a couple trim knives and replacement blades for these trim knives. These do have a lot of application they could be used in, so they're just good to have on hand. We have a primer WC111. It is a contaminant sealer, and it's a 1-to-1. And it's rolled on primarily as the application for that. Next, we have the Primer 41. That's primarily used for steel as a corrosion inhibitor. And that is used as a gravity-fed air gun, or it can also be rolled on. We have the graduating mixing cups there next to it there. That's how you can kind of identify what the ratio is and get a good mixture on that. We have the abrasive additive. Can be used on your final coat to get a good aggressive texture, more so than you normally would already have. We have the urethane-based caulking, and that's used to fill gaps or seams. We like to use urethane base over silicone because it has excellent adhesion to the product. And then we have air-to-oil, white lithium grease used to just grease various tools. We have the acetone there, and that's used to wipe down projects before application to make sure that they're good and clean. And as such a fast flash off time, we like to recommend that one. Also included are rebuild kits for your main pump, transfer pump, or gun. The best way we found to clean these before the rebuild is actually to use NMP in a cooker like this one. You set this temperature to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't want to go much warmer than that because you'll have too much of it evaporating. You want to soak the gun, pump parts in there to get nice and clean. Usually 30 minutes to an hour. Pull it out, wipe it off with acetone, and then install the new O-rings and gaskets. First off, then you got your machine. It's either a PHX2, PHX25, or a PHX40. They're all packaged in a very similar manner. We're going to go ahead and take this box off and kind of show you what's inside. This is just your regular standard strapping. Good clippers usually can get through these pretty well. Included inside of this box, we have 2 of your feed pumps. We'll get into that a little bit later, but they go with your some material. I'll go ahead and get these off. Also included with your system, you'll have various items that help you with your initial setup and get prepared for everything. This is an air dryer. You use this to try to get the moisture out of the air, which can be a battle sometimes, but this is a tool to help you with that. From the compressor, you'll directly connect to it, and then from there you can use other air lines to power the mixer, the pumps, everything like that. We'll get into that a little bit more later. As I was talking about the mixer a second ago, this is actually that mixer. There's an air mixer that goes on top of this, and that's what will agitate your drum. And with this machine, we pride ourselves of one of the best spray guns we have. It's the Probler P2 spray gun. You'll have one of those included as well. Very easy to use, easy to maintain. And then you'll have a line set, which is in this box here. A whip hose, which is in this box here. We'll go into installing that a little bit later. We have some paper, plastics for masking. We got tapes for masking. Breathing system. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. Along with just other basic tools and assembly stuff. And the feed hoses for these pumps here. All right, for this we want to check our incoming power to make sure we have an adequate enough supply to power this machine. And to do that, you'll lift this hood and get a reading off of the incoming power. And you'll need a multimeter, and you'll be setting it to your volt setting. And I will put the negative on the ground terminal, and then put the positive on L1. And I want to see between 108 and 120 on each 3 of these. One will be labeled L1, L2, and L3. Each of those I want to see between 108 and 120. You just got to remember that this machine is a 3-phase 230 volt. Now one of those is a neutral leg, so you are only going to be working off of 2 of those, so that would be a total of 240 volts, which is slightly more, but it doesn't hurt anything just to have a slightly more than that. All right, we're going to go ahead and install the components for our system. We're going to start with the drum agitator. As you see, it has these little blades on here. When it's in rotation, these will flip up to get a good agitation of your B side. It's only needed on the B side, it doesn't need to be on the A. To propel that, we actually use an air motor. As you see, there's a coupler here on the bottom. There's an identical one inside of this collar. So to make sure that they align appropriately before installing. And it should sit all the way down before tightening these thumb screws. So I want to make sure that these are nice and tight. To give it a little bit of extra, you can use a little groove on your drum wrench, slot it in to that thumb screw, and you can give it a little bit more of a turn to make sure that it's really tight. Next, we're going to go ahead and talk about the desiccant air assembly, and that is this here. We'll just simply remove this cap on top, and we'll fill it with the desiccant beads here. And to do so, simply pour it in until it's full. Then reinstall that cap on top, and that is good to go. We'll go ahead and remove the smaller bung, because that is where this is going to be installed at. Simply just use the drum wrench and loosen that smaller bung and remove it. And this will just thread right in there. And then next, we'll remove the larger bung on the other side. Again, you'll use that drum wrench to loosen up that cap. We'll get that removed. Then we'll be installing the transfer pump. Now, as you can see, there is a B resin sticker on this pump. It's going to be just for this B side drum. It'll never be used on the other side or the A side. Now, to install, simply just slide it into that larger slot. And there's a collar on this lower portion that you can unclip and tighten it like so. Make sure that it's all the way seated to the bottom attached to that drum. And then you can clip it in place, but I'm going to leave it open for now because this could vary in orientation depending on how that the next part is installed. And that is going to be the feed hose here. To install this, you'll simply put the 3/4 JIC, one end into this pump, and we'll get that started. And once you get it started and kind of hand tight, you'll go back over with a wrench to finish it off. And then the other end will be installed here on your inlet side. And again, we'll just hand tighten this end as well and come back after it with a wrench to make sure that it's tight. And since it's a JIC fitting, it doesn't need to be over tightened. Just simply until it'll almost feel like it just stops. All right, now that we have that installed, you can go ahead and clamp this back down. And then the A side will be installed the same exact way, except for it does not have the drum agitator. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and fill this isolube reservoir here on the side of the machine. Simply just remove that canister, and then you'll just unscrew it. And the isolube will come in a bottle just like this. Just pour it in until it's I usually go about 3/4 of the way full. And the point of this is to lubricate your ISO pump shaft while it's in operation. So we'll pour that in, and then we'll just simply reinstall the canister, and that's that. All right, so on this part, we're going to go ahead and install the line set. As you notice, one side is red, one side is blue. The red is for the A or ISO side, blue is for the B or resin side. The fittings under here differ from one side to the other, so this can only go on one way. So we'll start with the A side. Just slide it up on that fitting, and you'll want to just hand tight it as much as you can before you get a wrench to finish it off. So get that started. Pull the other side on. And then again, you'll want to hand tight it to get it start. Once you get it started, you can go ahead and cinch it down with a wrench. And then I'll get this other one going too. Then once you get them on there tight, we'll go ahead and install the wires for your hose heat. So for these, I just do it straight across here. And what you want to see when you slide this on is that blue cap. You want to see that disappear. And once it does, you know that it's in all the way. And you want to make sure that these connections are really tight. You don't want them to come loose. So make sure that that's tight. Do the same with the other side. Again, you want to see that cap disappear on installation to make sure that it's all the way in. Make sure that that's good and tight. And then finally, we want to install the thermocouple wire. That's this purple wire here. And you'll go ahead and this only goes on one way, so you may have to turn it a little for it to line up correctly. And then you'll thread on this nut. Now that is installed. So then next, we want to take a look at where we install the thermocouple, which is this right here. This goes after your section of line set before the whip hose. Now it actually gets installed this direction here, like that. This one's already installed, so we're not going to open it up. But these fittings differ in size depending on if it's the ISO or resin line. However, the air side is this one. It's the same size as the resin. But the only difference is it doesn't have a JIC fitting, as you can see here. Now on our system, you also see that the gun is also installed, but the line set, the blue side goes to the blue, the red to the red, and these do different sizes again on these fittings, so one goes on one way. And there is an extra section of airline in the box that your gun came in. Now you need to use that to attach the line set whip hose to your gun. All right, and this is your membrane air filter assembly. We prefer it to be wall mounted for easy access. And we need to adjust this regulator to 100 psi. And to do so, you lift up on the regulator and turn it clockwise until that reads 100. And you can close it back down once you have set it there. Next, we have our band heater down there at the base of the drum. That is to ensure that the drum is a good temperature to make it easier on that transfer pump to be able to move that material. In colder temperatures, it's necessary. In the warmer summer months, usually it isn't necessary. Next, we have the desiccant intake assembly. This has these blue colored beads in there, and what that desiccant beads do is they take moisture out of the air on the intake of this drum. So when these will eventually change color to pink after they're used up, and once it's pink all the way through, it's time to replace. However, these can be rejuvenated under like hot, steady heat, and they'll turn back blue once they're suitable to be reused. Next, we'll talk about the agitator and the air motor. The agitator mixes that B-side drum only, and it's important because over time they will settle out, and this will blend everything back together before operation. And that is done through this air motor. That's how you get the power to do so. Next, we have the transfer pump, and its purpose is to pull material out of the drum to feed it to the machine through your feed hose. It actually pulls from the very bottom. That's another reason why we like to have that heater on the very bottom, to ensure that the bottom is really warm to make it easier for this transfer pump to be in operation. Next, we'll follow the feed hose into the inlet of the machine, We'll have a ball valve here, and that's there for your safety if you need to do any maintenance on your Y screen or anything like that. And it also is a good idea to close it to keep everything contained in the machine and keep it from getting contaminated. Next, we have the Y screen in here. This is here in case you have any clumps or any kind of debris inside of the drum. It stops it from getting injected into your machine. It's a good idea to replace that or clean it every time you replace your drums. Next, you have your pressure gauge and your temperature gauge. That pressure gauge will fluctuate with this transfer pump, because that's what it's actually reading, is the pressure off of this coming into the machine. It will fluctuate some. We don't want to see it get below 150 psi, but it's usually between 150 up to 350, 400 pounds is what you normally see in that gauge. Next, you have your temperature gauge. That's reading the temperature of the material flowing into the machine. It's important to make sure that that number reads above 55 degrees for this particular equipment. And then from there, it'll flow into your main material pump, and that's driven by your hydraulic pump, and this is the hydraulic gauge for that pump. This is the isolube reservoir, and it will bring the isolube up into the iso pump shaft to lubricate it while it's in operation, and it will be returned back into this other line, back into the reservoir below. And the point of this is to lubricate that shaft so the iso side won't crystallize or harden on it and cause damage to the internal parts of your pump. From there, it goes through the pump to heater hose into the heaters. And the heaters are actually behind this panel out of view, but there is a separate heater for the A or iso side and the B or resin side. They both have their own heater back there. And from that heater, it comes out into this manifold, passing through your main material pressure gauges. And those read what the material is coming out at. And that gets that reading based on actually the power that the hydraulic pump has. We have bleed-off valves there in the front of the machine, as you see there. And then from there, the material will flow through your line set, through your thermocouple, and again, that's where we get our reading of what the hose heat is, and that sends that signal back to the machine so it can accommodate the heat. And then from there, it goes through a whip hose to connect to the gun, and that whip hose is just that shorter length of hose. I think it's like 6 feet long. And then next, we'll talk about your hydraulic gauge, how to adjust that pressure. There's a dial on the back of the machine. Turn it clockwise to turn that pressure up, counterclockwise to turn it down. Now, and that will actually reflect on these main material pressure gauges. It can vary depending on what material you're using. Some will be sprayed at about 1,000 psi, some 2,000 psi, some even more. And that will reflect on those gauges what that pressure is. And we don't want to see, ideally want to see those pressure gauges equal, but in some circumstances they do get a little bit off a bit. We don't want it to see anything more than 400 or 500 psi apart. Next, we have our control board. Here you have your main power switch. To turn that on to start lighting up your screen, you'll see as that is illuminated, meaning that you have power. And then next, what you'll do is you'll actually have the motor or the control power, turn that on, and that will light up the rest of your display. Now, your A heater and R heater knobs here control your ISO heater and your resin heater, or your B side heater. And you can control the temperature here on this far right side. You can turn that temperature up or down, and this larger number in the middle is what it currently reads. And the same operation for the hose heater. We do recommend the hose heater is set a few degrees below what these are set, just so your machine doesn't constantly have to try to warm that material in that line set. And it does take a little while to heat up your hose heat versus your A&R heater. They heat up almost instantly. The hose heater can take 15 to 20 minutes to do so. Next, we have our cycle counter. That keeps track of the cycles or strokes your machine does. For this particular machine, it is size 61 pumps, and every 55th stroke, that is 1 combined gallon. So a half gallon of B and a half gallon of A has been used. And you can actually, on this countdown counter, you can actually do the opposite. So we'll just assume that we'll use 100 total gallons because these drums aren't completely full, and so 5,500 is what we'll set this at, and it'll count down to 0. Once it hits 0, the machine will shut off, ensuring that you never run these drums dry. So there'll probably be a couple more gallons in each drum left over. Then next we have the pressure bounce control. We talked a little bit about the pressure earlier. You can set it anywhere from 300 to 700 psi difference. And what happens is when these material gauges get more than that set point difference, so say I have it set at 500 psi, if these are more than 500 apart, the machine will shut off, ensuring that your ratio will never be any worse than 500 apart. And that's important because if it's more than that apart, you can get bad product, so you can spray and you might run into some issues. Next, we have our pump control to put in retract or normal. We'll get a little bit more in that on the operations part of this, but that's how you turn the pump to go into normal. It means that you have it out of park and it's going to be working. And to turn on your hydraulic motor, you use the motor power, and that will turn that on. And then finally we have the emergency stop. If you need to shut this down for any reason, you just push in that button and it'll turn everything off, just like that. All right, for this, we're going to go ahead and go through the operation of the Probler P2 gun. Now to start, we usually send it with a breakdown of the gun, and it's readily available if you don't have one. And it has the part number for each individual piece and the chart number associated with that as well, to make it easy to identify parts that you may need for your gun. Now from there, we'll discuss about how the material flows through this gun. To start with, we'll go how it enters the gun, which is through that whip hose that's attached to that line set. Now through here, it'll go through a ball valve. That should always be closed unless an active operation will have that open. And from there, it'll go into the side block where it will come out of the injector. Now to show you that injector, I'll remove the side block. And to do so, you'll need one of the two tools included in your gun box. So there'll be a larger one and a smaller one. This larger one is the one that you will need to remove. Simply just unscrew the set screw. There'll be two, one on top and one below it. Remove both of these to remove that side block. Now once you have that removed, you'll be able to see that injector and the injector housing. And that are these components here. The smaller one in the middle is the injector, and the larger outer one is the housing for it. Now to remove this, you just need a wrench, and it shouldn't be on there very tight, so it should just do pretty easy to get it loose. Give it a few turns, and you usually can just use your fingers to loosen it up the rest of the way. Once that's removed, you'll notice that there is a spring inside of there. And you can remove that, and there's also the housing for the spring there too, or a base for that spring. The next thing I want to go over is how to separate the injector and the injector housing. There is an O-ring in here, and on the breakdown, the chart number gives it the number 35, and that's one that needs to be periodically changed because it does get wore out. Now to separate these two pieces, I like to start with the base of this so you can kind of loosen them from each other, and then the rest of the way to use the front. And again, you want to be careful not to scratch or cause any damage to that injector, so you need to be very careful not to cause any of that. And next, you'll be able to separate the two. And as you see, that O-ring is right there. If you're going to replace it, I recommend using the fusion grease that's included in your gun box, just to wipe some of that grease on there before you install a new one. And once you have the new one installed, you can simply put it back in place with the housing for that injector. Just slide it back in. Push it the rest of the way in with your tool here, and you want it to pop out of the top. And once you're done with that, you can set that aside momentarily while you install the base or the housing for that spring. So go ahead and slide that into place first, and then the spring goes in next. And then on top of that is the housing and the injector. So you go ahead and start threading that on. And it doesn't need to be over tight. I do just until it basically feels like it will just stop is what it will feel like, and that's when you know it's good enough. And then next I want to talk about is the screen and the screen housing, which is located here. To access that, you don't need to take the side block off. I'm only doing so because I already have it removed. And again, you can use just a wrench to get it loose. Once it's loosened up enough, you can always use your fingers to kind of finish it off. The reason for this screen is to get any kind of particulates or anything like that will collect on the screen instead of going into your gun. Now, occasionally you will need to check these screens to make sure they don't have a buildup. More often than not, it'll be the A or ISO side that you'll need to check more so than the blue or resin side. Also in this compartment there'll be a little ball, and that is the check ball, and then also there'll be a spring located inside the bottom of that as well. Now that check ball, it serves a couple purposes. Primarily what it does is it helps protect your gun from getting any issues with getting crossovers is what we call it. So if you have more pressure coming in one side than the other because of restriction, that will cross over your gun into the other side. This will protect your gun from letting that happen. This check ball will plug it if it's backlogging back. So if you have an overpressure on one side, this will plug it from being able to travel back up the other side. Now you can remove this screen from its housing by simply pulling up on it like so, and you can rinse it off in an acetone or a solvent and make sure that it's clean before the reinstall. There also is a O-ring here. We refer to this as the number 7 on that chart. That one also can be replaced periodically, and again I would use that grease to lubricate it before you install a new one. And simply just slide that screen back over the housing, and then you'll start with the spring goes first. That's the first component that needs to be installed, followed by that check ball. That will be installed second. And then the rest of this will screw in. And now again, you just need to be over tightened, just tighten it enough until it will feel like it just stops again, and that's tight enough. Now once you get all of that back installed, you can reinstall the side block just with those 2 set screws again. But I'm going to leave it off and remove the other side block. The internal workings of the red or blue side are exactly identical. The only difference is just the orientation. And the ISO one has ISO stamped on the side. The only other difference is just the color of the ball valve. So we're not going to get into the internal workings of this one. We'll just set this to the side for now. Now I'm going to remove the head of the gun to access the mix chamber. Now to do so, there'll be 2 more set screws here, and that's what that smaller tool will be used for. Before we remove those, we'll remove the end cap here. And to do that, just loosen that with a wrench until it's loose enough to get the rest of the way off. And on this one, there also is another O-ring. We've heard of that on the breakdown as the number 36. This one, if it ever needs to be replaced, again, use that white lithium grease before installing it back onto the gun. Next, you have your mix chamber insert, which is this piece too, or referred to as just your spray tip. This determines the size of your spray pattern. The larger the number, the larger your spray pattern will be. The standard size is an 01 mix chamber insert. All right, so next I'm going to remove the head, and what I'm going to do is use the smaller tool that was included to remove these 2 smaller set screws. And once those 2 are removed, the head of the gun will just slide off. It's important not to swivel this or to jar up or down. It's important to slide it straight off. If you try to pull up on it or kind of wiggle it, you can damage this stem here and it can snap. Now that you have the mix chamber exposed, we can remove it. So I'll go ahead and put this wrench on and I'll loosen it, and you can uninstall it the rest of the way by hand. And I'll go over the importance of this mix chamber because it's a very crucial portion of your gun. Now for these side ports, it's important not to have any scratches or debris or burrs on these because they mate with the injector on the side block that we took off. So the operation of the gun is when the trigger's pulled, this mix chamber slides back and aligns that side port with that injector. When the trigger's not pulled, it slides forward and it no longer aligns. So if there's a scratch on this surface or this surface, it can cause a leak. So it's important to keep these very clean and very smooth. Now for the reinstallation of this mix chamber, simply just put it back on top of that stem and slowly just thread it back in until you get it started, and we'll get it in and we'll tighten it the rest of the way with that wrench. Now it's important to note not to loosen it because it may not align properly with the injector. So if it's not where it needs to be, you can tighten it and it will just pivot until you get it to where these holes in the side ports align side to side. You don't want to install them when they're facing up and down. You want to make sure that they're on the side of the mix chamber. So then next we'll reapply the head. So what we'll do is we'll line it up best we can, and we don't want to turn it too much. We want to just slide it straight on and let everything line up. And then we'll go ahead and put the smaller set screws will be going into this place, and we'll mount that there. And we'll need the smaller tool for this portion to reinstall the head. And they don't need to be super tight, just get it to where it feels like it just stops, and do the same with the other side. Once these are installed, you can go ahead and put the mix chamber insert back in, and that just slides in here on the tip of the mix chamber. And then we'll put the end cap back on, and we'll thread that back on here. Once we get it hand tight, we'll do one more little turn with the wrench to make sure it's on there appropriately. Then we'll reinstall the side blocks. And again, it's just those 2 set screws on either side that hold it in place, and you'll need the larger tool that was included to do this. You'll get that back into place. And I usually don't tighten it all the way on one side until I get the other one tightened a little bit as well, just to make sure it's even. And then we will flip it over and install the other side block. These side blocks are identical on both sides. The only difference is the A side has ISO stamped on it. The internal components are exactly the same. The other subtle difference is the color of the ball valve. The ISO is red and the resin is blue. But everything else is the same on the internal parts, including the screen housing, and the injector housing. Now that we have that back installed, I'm going to talk about the switch here. This is how you could turn on and off your air to the gun. And the air, that's how you turn it on, and then this is how you turn it off. The purpose of the air is only to slide that mix chamber to align with the side block injector ports. Now at the end of the day, once you're finished spraying, you want to make sure that you clean your gun with this drill bit that's included. In that box, you'll have a series of bags with numbers on them. The one numbered 01 is more of the standard size drill bit. There'll be a larger and smaller drill bit in this bag. The larger one is used for the tip of the gun, and the smaller one is used for the ports on the side of the mix chamber. That is something you do more of a weekly maintenance. The day-to-day will need just a larger one for the tip of the gun. Now, while your air is on, you will drill the tip of your gun to make sure there's nothing blocking it and it's nice and clear. After you do that, you actually will use a grease gun that's also included in your gun box, and you use it on this grease point here. Do a couple pumps of grease until you have a light mist coming out of the end of the gun. Then you know that you have enough grease inside of the gun there. And then you can turn your air off, and then again you want to make sure that these valves are closed, and then that will be it. The point of that grease is to coat the inside of that mix chamber, so if there is any residual ISO in there, it won't harden or crystallize before your next use. All right, now to turn your air on this Probler P2 gun, you slide the cylinder forward, and that is when you have the air is on. You'll actually feel the air purging out of the end of the gun when it is on, if your air and everything going to it is done properly. And to turn it off, you simply just slide it back up in the locking position, and the air will stop at the end of the gun. All right, so for this, we're going to follow the flow of material. So from your whip hose, the material goes into your sides here, one on the resin or blue side, one on the ISO or A side. And from there, it'll go pass through the ball valves into the side block. And to remove that side block, there's 2 set screws, one there on top and one there on the bottom. I'll remove both of these, and we'll follow that flow of material. Now, the A and B side are both identical on all the workings of it. So once it gets through the ball valve into the side block, it'll come out that injector or side seal, which is this point here. And from there, it will go into that mix chamber once the trigger is full. Because when the air is flowing, without the trigger pulled, the air goes through that side port to purge out that mix chamber, and the air will exit the end of the gun. When the trigger is pulled, the mix chamber slides back to align that side port to the hole on your injector, and that's when you have material flowing through. And when both sides do that, they will mix together in this mix chamber and exit the gun through the tip. All right, for this we're going to talk about the initial filling of your machine and line set of material. But first we want to attach our air lines to this membrane air filter like I have done already here. One of these air lines will run to your A side drum, and that just has the transfer pump. There isn't an agitator needed on that side. The other air line will go to your line set and eventually get down to your gun for that operation. The third air line I have sitting right here will install it into our agitator. Now this would be a good time to go ahead and put in a couple drops of air-to oil, or you can also use aerosol white lithium grease. So I'll just do a couple drops here on this fitting here before the beginning of every day you're going to use it, and install it here. At this point, you'll let it mix a minute per gallon. For a brand new drum, it's going to be about 50 gallons, so you might as well just wait an hour. And this will be a good time to go ahead and fill your pigment inside of this drum. And the best way to do that, you want to allow this to be mixing beforehand. After you have it started, you can pour in the pigment by simply just lifting this up, pour in the pigment there. Another place that you can do this is remove the intake filter and take this off and pour it in at this point. You can also use a funnel if you need to. After this is done mixing for the whole hour, you can remove this air line and reinstall on your transfer pump. Once it's installed, you can turn this on. Now on a new empty hose, it may jump a little bit, and that's totally normal. Next, you want to open up your valve on the side of the machine, and you'll see some pressure here on your gauge. And next, you want to ensure that this is in the retract position, and then you will go over to your gun at the end of your line set. At this point, you'll remove your side block. And to do that, you'll use that tool that was also included in your gun box. You'll remove both of these set screws here, the one on top and then the one on the bottom. And once you have those out, you'll take the side block off, and you will bring the side block over the bucket and make sure the injector is facing into the bucket or empty waste basket. Slowly open up this valve, and you'll have a steady flow of material. So once you have a good steady flow of material, you can shut it off, reinstall into the gun. And you'll repeat this process with the other side, but you will not need to agitate. And then you'll just screw this one on and put the bottom set screw in. And then at this point, you have material flowing through your machine and your line sets. All right, so from here, we'll turn our main power switch on, our control power. And then from here, we'll set our A or ISO heater or B or resin heater. We'll set those by adjusting it all the way on the right side. There'll be arrows going up or down. Set it to the desired temperature. Most of the time, we do set it around 150 on these primarily, and the hose heat will set about a few degrees below that, so it's not constantly calling for heat. Makes it a little bit easier to load on the machine. So once you have these set where you desire them to be, you can go ahead and turn them on. Now we will only start with the hose heater because it does take 15 to 20 minutes for this to heat up. Now so a lot of times we'll have that actually warming up while we're agitating in the morning. Now after that reaches its set temperature, you can go ahead at this point, turn on your A or ISO heater or B or resin heater. You can heat those up, and they do heat up significantly quicker than the hose heat. At this point, we'll go ahead and put this pump switch into normal. Before I turn that on, I like to ensure that I have all my valves open. I want to double check that, make sure that the transfer pump valve is open and the valve on the side of the machine open, and they all are. And at this point, we'll power up the machine by switching the motor on. All right, now for a temporary shutdown, if you're going on a lunch break, you can go ahead and follow these steps. First, we'll turn off the motor power. We'll turn off your A and R heaters or your ISO resin heaters. We'll leave the hose heat on to maintain that hose heat. We'll put this into the neutral position, which is just straight up, and we'll go ahead and close our valves, starting with the transfer pumps and our inlet valve here on the side. We'll do the same with the other side as well. And then once we've come back from our break, we want to get up and running again. All we simply need to do is open these valves and the inlet valve as well. Make sure we do the same on both sides. Open that inlet valve and this transfer pump valve. And we'll turn our A and R heaters or ISO resin heaters back on. We'll put this back into normal, and we'll turn our motor power back on. And you're ready for operation. All right, for this, we're gonna go over the shutdown. So the first thing we're gonna do is put this into retract. And we'll wanna pull the trigger on your spray gun until you get about 500 pounds left in each of your main material gauges. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and turn the motor power off and turn off your A heaters, your R heaters or resin heaters, and your hose heater at this point. Now the purpose of putting this into retract at the end of the day is so the ISO shaft will be retracted inside of this pump so it's unable to dry out or be exposed to open air. So it's very important to do this at the end of the day to prolong the life of your ISO pump. And then after you're finished with all this shutting down, you can turn your control power off, and you can turn your main power off, and then you'll want to leave your air on your gun and drill the tip and grease. All right, so for this we'll go over some troubleshooting. As you see, we have a red light here, meaning our pressure balance control has tripped. And the cause for that would be your main material outlet gauges being more than 500 pounds apart. So we need to figure out the cause of that. Now the A side is higher than the B side, so likely it's a restriction on the A side and on the gun, or it could possibly be a feed issue on the B side. We'll start with that. So the first thing I want to look at is your inlet pressure. And it is above 150 psi, so I'm not worried about the feed on that. I'm going to go ahead and eliminate that as a culprit. So the next thing that I want to look at is your Y screen, which is located here. I want to make sure that's clear of debris or any kind of buildup. And if it is clean, we'll go ahead and move to the next possible thing. Now, since the inlet seems good, we'll go ahead and move more towards an issue on the ISO side in the gun. Now, usually if this gauge is significantly higher on the A side especially, usually that does point to an issue on the A side. It could be just the screen is plugged up, or it could be there's a buildup on the mix chamber side port. And I'll go over that here momentarily. So for that, we'll need to go ahead and grab our spray gun, remove that, and we'll need to take our side block off, like we've done in the past. Now for that, what we can do is simply just take off these two set screws. And doing that, we'll be able to remove that side block, and we'll be able to inspect the mix chamber side port to make sure that it is clear. So we'll go ahead and remove these, take that side block off, and there's the side port. You want to use the smaller drill bit that was included in your gun box and clear that out. Make sure there's no buildup. It should freely move side to side while you're threading it in. It shouldn't have any resistance at all. And we'll do the same on the other side as well, just to ensure that you don't have a resistance on the other side, just to make sure. And then next we want to do is remove the gun screen to make sure that that's clean. And to do so, you can access that by removing this. You can remove that with it still, the side block still attached to the gun. But here, since I already have it off, I'm going to go ahead and just remove it from here. So I'll go ahead and loosen it with a wrench. And what I'm looking for is any kind of crystals or any kind of foreign objects kind of built up inside of this screen. So once I get it out, I'll inspect it. And you can clean this screen with a solvent or acetone, anything like that. Make sure it's clean, and you can reinstall. Now, if it is clean, that it means that there could be something else. Likely there could be something still foreign in that mix chamber. And you can use that NMP that we talked about earlier and soak that mix chamber to clean it thoroughly before reinstall. Now that I got the screen back installed, I'll reinstall the side block onto the side of the gun. I'll make sure I get this. You want to make sure that it's lined up before installation and start these set screws here. And then I like to start one side, and then I'll start the other before I finish tightening them down. And then I'll get this one started, and then I'll finish tightening it. And then I'll tighten the other side as well. And then at this point, we want to even out the pressures on the main pressure gauges right here. So since this B side is lower than the A side, I want to bring that A side pressure down. I don't want to just pull the trigger before I reset this balance control and continue spraying. So what I'll do is I'll remove the nut on this bleed off valve. This is a good way to bleed off any excess pressure that you may have built. So you'll loosen this nut, removing it. And then we highly recommend using safety glasses for this because it is under pressure. And we'll slowly open up this valve until we have that pressure evened out with the other side. And then once they're even, you're good to reset. You'll put that nut back on as a safety. And then you can come up here, reset this gauge and set it back to 500, and you can turn your motor back on. After you ensure you have all your valves open on your transfer pump and the inlet side, make sure that you have all of these open. You'll turn this back on. And you're ready to spray.